Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining me, Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. Today, I'm so happy to have as our guest Dr. Dean Mitchell. He's a medical doctor and one of the leading experts in the country in using sublingual immunotherapy for environmental, food, and Candida antigens. He's the author of a wonderful book called Dr. Dean Mitchell's Allergy and Asthma Solutions, and he specializes in treating immune conditions such as fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, Candida, hypersensitivity, and food allergies. He is a clinical assistant professor at Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine in New York City, and he has his own podcast called The Smartest Doctor in the Room. And he is with us today. You can find out more at care@mitchellmedicalgroup.com. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Mitchell.
Thank you for having me, Ellen. It's a pleasure.
You know, from the description of what you have, I am guessing that the kind of allergy desensitization tool that you're using, and we'll talk about it, is something that I actually was in charge of at the Corsello Center for Integrative Medicine throughout the late 1970s and all through the 80s. In fact, I was with Dr. Corsello for over 20 years. And so it sounds very similar to what we were doing. So I'm really interested to see how you do this system.
Yeah, Dr. Corsello, I never met her, but I heard wonderful things about her. And, it's interesting. Some of the practitioners were trying out sublingual at the time. It was really at a very early stage. I like to think that we've advanced it and perfected it a little bit, but I give so many of the practitioners credit who at the time were against fierce opposition from a lot of our conventional colleagues during that time.
Oh, yeah, always. That was a constant fight. But we persevered, and we treated many thousands and thousands of patients, and we had two locations, both in Manhattan on the corner of 57th and 7th, which was a pretty prominent location, and also in Huntington, Long Island.
That sounds like me. I'm a block away from where she was, and I'm also on Long Island in Rockville Center, so I'm surprised we never crossed paths before.
But thank goodness that you are carrying this excellent kind of therapeutic modality into the future. So just to give a little background to our listeners today, what are the most common food allergies?
Well, I think the most common, it depends on the age range. The most common in children is probably the peanut, which everyone's really aware of. And believe it or not, in adults, I believe it's shrimp, or the shellfish. So it really varies a little bit because things change as we age. But I think the also other important thing is there's really, roughly about 10 very common food allergens: milk, egg, wheat, soy, peanut, tree nuts, and the shellfish, and also sesame seed. So those are really some of the big common ones that I frequently see in my office and that can cause, significant reactions.
Now, how, when a patient comes to your office, and your office, is that called Mitchell Medical Group? If
Correct.
People were to find you, okay, Mitchell Medical Group. And I want to just show a copy of your book here to our listeners. And, we are on Facebook Live. So those of you who are picking us up on Facebook Live, although, unfortunately, Dr. Mitchell is not here with us in the studio, we are looking at a picture of his book, which is called Allergy and Asthma Solutions, with a beautiful picture of Dr. Mitchell right on the cover.
Yeah, I got a little older since then, but...
just a little, Dr. Mitchell. You're still recognizable. But now, when people do seek you out, sometimes they've already been through a whole range of what we would call conventional testing.
Right.
And so what would be the difference with how you would evaluate it?
That's a good question. I'm a little bit unconventional in a lot of ways, but I think hopefully in a good way. But, one of the things that I primarily do, which a lot of the allergists don't do, is I do a lot of the blood testing for allergies. I think it's really quite good these days. In fact, I think it's got a lot of advantages over typical skin testing. One, you don't have to have stop medications before you do the testing, where a lot of times people are suffering, whether it's during the pollen season or they're at home exposed to a cat or dog all the time, and they almost literally feel like they cannot stop their antihistamine. So the blood testing, you don't have to do that because it doesn't affect the testing. The other thing too, of course, with the scratch or prick testing, people swell up and they are uncomfortable. The blood is really amazing. We get all the key information, and in fact, it actually goes to even higher level, which I'm a little bit of an expert in, is that we can actually know the specific components of a food that are actually make you more at risk for a dangerous reaction. And so, for example, I'll give you an example. Someone came to me with peanut allergy. Maybe they got skin tested by another doctor. It could be what's called a cross-reaction, because peanut cross-reacts with some other foods like soy and even certain inhaled pollens like grass pollen. So if I did the blood test on them, I would be able to delineate, are they truly allergic to peanut by looking at the protein components. I wrote an article about this in one of the medical journals, and I could tell them, yes, you are allergic to peanut. You need to stay away from it. And as I guess we may get to later, there's an option for treatment. So I think that has, that's something different that I do in my practice.
Now, when you say blood tests, are we talking about something like IgE or IgG? There's a difference between those.
Thank you for bringing that up, because, this happens every day in my practice because, again, I do a lot of holistic medicine, and so patients of mine have sometimes seen holistic practitioners in their area, and the biggest mistake that I see is that patients have had what's called an IgG food allergy test. Sometimes it's called the ALCAT. And the reason I believe it's really not a helpful test is that we all make IgG when we eat certain foods. So the testing is really not helpful to tell if you have what's called a true allergy. That you really need what's called IgE testing. And that's available at most of the commercial labs, as I mentioned, and the more specific testing called component testing is available at a bunch of them as well.
So the components are actually in the realm of the IgE, which are different, different ways of mediating how our immune system actually works.
Right.
So we all know interesting.
We all know that. I always like telling this story, actually, because people are always baffled by why do people have allergies? What could be the purpose of an allergy, And I like to sort of tell people the story that story I had read, that there was this person that worked at the zoo, and one of his jobs was, unfortunately, cleaning out the lion's cage. And so when he used to go in there and clean up all the stuff, the guy was like sneezing and he couldn't breathe, and he went to see an allergist, and they did testing, and the person was highly allergic to cats. And now, as we know, the lions, the tigers, they're all from that line, in genealogy. And it got me thinking, realizing, gosh, back in prehistoric man, if you had IgE to cats or, to lions or tigers, that could be a very helpful thing to make sure if you had the scent that, you start sneezing when you're in the bushes somewhere, that could save your life. Today, it's just a huge annoyance, and fortunately, I'm able to help a lot of patients that have cat or dog allergy.
Especially if you work in a zoo with the lions. Well, let me just reintroduce you. Listeners, yes. I want you to know you're listening to Herbally Yours right here on the Voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. And we are interviewing today Dr. Dean Mitchell, and we're talking about allergies and asthma solutions. And you can find him at mitchellmedicalgroup.com. So thank you for elucidating the fact that you prefer doing not only an IgE, but something that might be new to our listeners, which is components, where you're going deeper into the sensitivity to find out which component a person might be sensitive to. That's very interesting. Like, for instance, you mentioned wheat and gluten. Within wheat, there are many components that someone might be sensitive to gliadin or something else.
Right.
So how does that help you as an allergist to help them?
Well, two ways. One, I think it is important. I think a better example, too, could be egg, for example.
Okay,
egg has two really key components, something called ovomucoid and another thing called ovalbumin. And interestingly, like I say, when I order, if a patient says, I can't eat scrambled eggs, or sometimes I can get away with eating a muffin that has an egg baked into it, and I can tell from the testing if they're allergic, if they're positive, for example, to the ovomucoid, those patients typically can't eat egg in any form. They can't eat it, obviously, raw, cooked, or baked. Whereas if someone has ovalbumin, which is a lesser or minor allergen, they typically can get away with if the egg is in a muffin or a cake or something, but they can't handle it as, let's say, scrambled eggs. So I think it's important for a patient because, again, for fear factor and limitations in their diet, that it's helpful to know how extreme the allergy is, and the blood can tell you that for certain foods.
So then, once you develop a protocol through your testing, both blood testing, and I believe you said you're not doing that wheel testing.
I do it rarely. I can do it if I need to, but I don't really do it for the food or environmental that often. It's only if something is not matching up.
So that makes visiting Dr. Mitchell a lot more comfortable than going to...
Yes, we have a lot less screaming in the office.
Right, I would imagine. So it's really a very new and unique approach. And once you determine the range of allergies, then your treatment protocol is also quite unique.
Yeah, I like to think that we try to do state-of-the-art here, what the latest research shows. And I've actually been doing sublingual allergy drops for over 20 years for environmental allergies. I was fortunate. I wrote about this in the book. I trained with a doctor that was really iconoclastic, revolutionary in a lot of ways, but working in obscurity in Wisconsin. And he had trained with the Europeans, Dr. David Morris, who was really one of my idols. But I was fortunate to read an article over 20 years ago about him doing work with sublingual drops. And at the time, I'm dating myself, before the internet, I found out his name from a journal article, and I flew out to Wisconsin and I trained with him. And I came back and I started doing the drops, and I saw that they were very safe, which is really a huge contrast from the allergy injections, which can sometimes give dangerous reactions. And I saw within a year that it was effective. And I've been doing it for 20 years. I've treated thousands of patients with it for a variety of airborne allergens, for mold, dust mites, animal dander. In fact, I just had a patient, it was kind of funny, she's a Cornell veterinary student who was highly allergic to cats, dogs, and horses and couldn't even go near them. And
maybe rethink her choice.
Yeah, so I was wondering why she chose that field, but she loves animals. And the irony, too, was also the other reason she came to us because she, believe it or not, too, she's extremely fearful of shots. And so the idea of the drops worked really well for her, and so she's been really successful. And, now with the latest research showing that you can do the same for food allergies, I thought it was really time to step out there again and help more people that, there are a lot of kids and adults that live a very frightened or limited lifestyle because of their food allergy.
Well, we're going to take a little break here right now. Dr. Dean Mitchell, author of The Allergy and Asthma Solution. And, you can call in with your questions after the break at 516-572-7440. That's 516-572-7440. You're listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at nccradio.org, on iHeartRadio, and now on Facebook Live right here in studio. For more information on today's guest or topic, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. Stay tuned. Herbally Yours will be right back.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shelley Flace with today's tip for kids from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Food additives can harm children's development and raise the risk of obesity. To lower the risks, choose fresh fruits and vegetables when you can and avoid processed meats. Don't put plastic in the microwave because heat can cause chemicals to leak into your food. When cooking or serving hot foods, use glass or ceramic dishes. For more on keeping your child healthy, talk with your pediatrician or visit healthychildren.org.
And welcome back to more right here on Herbally Yours. We are on the line with allergy specialist Dr. Dean Mitchell, author of Allergy and Asthma Solution, and the head of MitchellMedicalGroup.com, where he treats people for all different kinds of allergies. And he's discussing with us some of his real unique both testing and treatment protocols, which not only are effective, but save you a lot of pain, which is really wonderful and work well. Now, Dr. Mitchell, welcome back to more.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Interesting that you shared that story about that woman. I actually went to Cornell for pre-veterinary medicine myself. So,
oh, is that right?
But I found it interesting that she was actually allergic to animals and chose that. So the same thing with foods. Once you discover what's going on with someone in their allergy protocol, before you develop the protocol, do they need to, let's say, stop eating those foods or get rid of their pets if it was an allergy to animals?
Well, that's a good question. It depends on the situation. What typically happens, I sometimes have families that come to me. One that comes to mind was like a parent was highly allergic to dogs. She couldn't even go in a room where a dog was, and her kids were dying to have a dog. And so a mom came to me and said, look, I can't get sick, and so we're not going to get a pet. But if there's any way that by you treating me, this can work, I'd love to give it a try. And fortunately, I tested her, and she was highly positive to the dog, and then we treated with the sublingual drops. And she waited, which was nice. She waited about 9 months before getting the dog because I'd built up a certain amount of immunity with her through the drops, and she ended up tolerating the dog really well. She ended up, the dog became her best friend. He went with her everywhere.
Would you suggest that perhaps she should choose, let's say, a low allergy kind of dog, like Maltese or Poodle?
It's hard to really predict. I do tell patients sometimes it's not a bad idea to sometimes take her for a little test drive, hang out with the dog, but sometimes it's hard to predict. But usually when we desensitize them, it works. And it doesn't really matter whether it's, usually smaller dogs are a little bit better, obviously, than a large dog. With cats, it doesn't matter. It's kind of universal, the dander and the saliva. But we can treat them. I do also treat patients that have them already. Sometimes patients develop this. They know they're allergic. They're living through it, but their symptoms are getting worse. Like they're getting asthma, which can happen, over prolonged periods of time, even if they've never had that before, from the chronic exposure.
Well, now you're talking about something else besides just annoyance. You're talking about dangerous food allergies, which we also have.
Yeah.
So what is an appropriate treatment for that kind of person? Would you still say they should have a therapeutic dose of a pharmaceutical for emergencies?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, what I'll do is obviously I have to stabilize the patient. So if a patient's starting to develop chronic asthma, they can't sleep, they're wheezing, I will put them on inhalers, and I'll tell them, look, this is to stabilize the situation while I can, help you through the natural desensitization with the drops, but that will take a few months. So they have to be hopefully on board and agree to that for everything to work.
Because you don't want to create a situation that's life-threatening on the way.
No, of course, right. No, of course I would. Again, that's the benefit, of being a physician and doing holistic medicine, is that I always say to patients, I'm in both worlds. There are terrific holistic practitioners out there. Some of them, believe it or not, even in health food stores. I've met several that were super knowledgeable and I really respect. The only disadvantage for them is they can't do the kind of testing and evaluation that I can do as a physician. And on the other side, again, I have my conventional colleagues who are all well-trained, good people, but sometimes they're kind of limited in, what they think should be done, and they're just following the pharmaceutical route, which I don't think always is the best answer, and definitely not the best long-term answer. So,
but isn't
that's
that
really what we
what's
try to
great?
Combine here.
Yes, it is great, and we're talking here to Dr. Dean Mitchell. Allergy and Asthma Solution is the name of his book. and Mitchell Medical Group. And what you just said, Dr. Mitchell, I really admire, because I think that is where, truthfully, all of healthcare should go. And that would be where we really are integrative. We're using best of both worlds, because your special therapies, like what you're talking about with the desensitization through drops, is so non-invasive, so safe, and so effective. It should be the standard of practice. And then we have pharmaceutical backups for when necessary, but not as first-line intervention when not necessary.
I agree with you 100%. You know, it's when you talk about it, it's interesting too. That's what I love about. I mean, fortunately, I was invited by Alex Labarsky, to the Science of Human Optimization conference that's coming up in November 9th and 10th, and I'm really excited. I'll be speaking there about Candida and autoimmunity. But I love the idea of what they're trying to do here, that to try to find the practitioners that can come to the forefront and get other doctors excited about what can be done and not have to rely on the pharmaceutical company sponsoring conferences where they have, unfortunately, their agenda.
So I just want to throw that out, too, because a good place to find information is at navelexpo.com, because that's an easy place to look up, navelexpo.com, and everyone can find the many conferences that Alex puts forth, including one coming up shortly where you're a featured speaker, so people can attend the conference, meet you, see if that's the kind of allergy desensitization they're interested in. And of course, Candida is such a big buzzword. What would you like to share that, perhaps people don't know about that?
Yeah, that is so important. And again, patients are bewildered. I actually did a video of this. I think it's on Facebook, called The 10th Doctor. And it's about that most of my patients have seen 9 other doctors by the time they come to me. And one of the diagnoses that gets overlooked a lot, and I'll be speaking about at the conference, is Candida overgrowth or hypersensitivity. And the difficulty for patients is that their conventional doctors will say it doesn't exist and nonsense. Yet these patients go online, they look up their symptoms, they realize that this is something that probably is happening to them, and they don't know, aside from the diet, how to get help, because the diet will help patients, but not always significantly enough. And that's what I'm going to be speaking about at the conference, because it seems to be an epidemic, I think, because antibiotics have been widely used, and maybe overused in some cases. The use of acid blockers, acid-suppressing medications, and the birth control pill or hormonal medications. These are all things that have changed the microbiome, which we understand now is this balance between the good and the bad bacteria in the gut, which gives multiple different manifestations. And so Candida, I like to think of as one of the classic microbiome conditions, which fortunately we can treat and help people.
That's true, because it's something that does exist in a normal microflora, but right, it becomes imbalanced and takes over, and you actually can see it. It's very amazing to me when many conventional physicians go, oh no, that's just a theory. That's not true. I have seen it on even microscope analysis on the lining of the intestines.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you could actually even see it even more clearly. I'll tell you the points that I look for when a patient comes to me. First, I look at their tongue, the way they do in Asian medicine. And if they have too much of a white coating, that's an example of it. Other areas are on the skin. I mean, when patients are developing these rashes, and especially in the groin area or areas that I would diagnose as fungal dermatitis. And, of course, the toenails, or the nails, the hand, the fingernails, where, they're getting that greenish discoloration. These are all signs, basically screaming out there's too much yeast in the body. And again, when you just put a cream on the area, you're not dealing with the underlying problem, which is really, most cases, from the gut. So,
and it does necessitate changing diet and eating less sugar.
Of course, that's huge. I tell patients, they said, you gotta put out the fire really by not feeding it into the fire.
And then you would give them the appropriate sublingual drops that you prepare.
Yeah.
I would imagine it's unique to each individual. It's not something like over the counter.
No, it's not over the counter. It's definitely something that we make that's like, a prescription in office. But what I would do, Ellen, what I tell patients, and sometimes I have about 20% of my practice now is coming from out of state because they're desperately seeking a doctor that can help them when they've tried the diet alone and they've gotten only a little bit better. What I typically do in the office, we will do some vitamin treatments, whether injections or sometimes IVs, to build up their reserve of vitamins so that I can then try to rebalance them with antifungal medications very carefully. But patients do seem to do really well, and we rebalance them. And then ultimately, after 4 to 6 weeks of treatment, we will discuss with them whether they want to do the sublingual drops. And the purpose of that is to not only build up their immunity, but allow them to expand their diet. And not that we tell them to go crazy again with pizza, pasta, and bagels, but occasionally, in social events and things that they can have a more normal life and not run into trouble.
Well, I'd like to ask you at least one more question. Unfortunately,
Sure.
We're getting close to the end. But what about introducing potentially allergic foods to infants, such as discussed
yes.
in the LEAP study?
Yeah, so that's great. I was just talking about that on my podcast that's going to come out next week. We were talking about that. I think it's important. I think the biggest problem, though, as I mentioned on this podcast coming out, that it really relies on the parents and the pediatricians because they're not going to really get to a specialist in time. So, unfortunately, and the allergy community hasn't done enough to really make sure pediatricians are super aware and comfortable telling parents who may be really afraid of giving their child a food like peanut, but not realizing that the studies are clearly showing when they compared Israel, for example, to London and New York with the same type of Jewish population, that the kids in Israel, the infants in Israel, were developing much less peanut allergy because the moms were feeding the kids bamba, which it turns out to be a very popular treat in Israel. It's like a Cheerio with peanut covering on it, that they, this early introduction actually prevents the child from developing peanut allergy, which just turns the whole idea on its head. I mean, everybody used to tell people don't have a peanut in, for the first 3 years of life, that type of thing.
Well, that's great information. And as we sign off here, Dr. Mitchell, give us the best way to find you.
I think online. I think if you Google Mitchell Medical Group and you put in any certain type of key terms like food allergy or Candida, we come up a lot because I think we're putting out a lot of important information to hopefully help the patient wherever they live and wherever they are. I also will do virtual consultations for patients as well, so that they can hopefully get the right information and get the right treatment even locally.
Even at a distance. So I want to thank you so much for being with us. And thank
My
you,
pleasure.
listeners.
This was terrific, Ellen. Thank you for all those great questions.
It was fun. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours. It's produced at the studios right here, 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at WHPC@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi, the Natural Nurse at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.